Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today we have a really special guest who will be speaking to a very important movement, Lenore Skenazy. After her column, Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone, she created a media firestorm and wrote the book Free Range Kids. This grew into the Free Range Kids movement, which grew into Let Grow, the national nonprofit promoting childhood independence, co-founded by Lenore, Jonathan Haidt, Danielle Schuchman, and Peter Gray in 2017. Lenore's feisty belief that our kids are smarter and safer than our culture gives them credit for landed her on The Daily Show, The Today Show, Dr. Phil, one of my favorites, PBS, CBS, Fox News, NPR, BBC, CBC, the list goes on. So she gave us one of the 10 essential TED Talks of 2025, The Reasonable Childhood Independence Law, inspired by her work with Congress. It has been passed in 13 states and was recently introduced by Congress. A former New York newspaper columnist, Lenore lives in New York City with her husband and beloved computer. Her sons have flown the coop, which is good for proof of concept purposes, but she misses them. And for the record, she used to write for Mad Magazine. Yep, Mad. So that is quite an introduction for a guest. Lenore, I keep doing that, Lenore.
That's okay. Sharon,
Lenore. But you have quite the experience in dealing with kids, researching children, and really your work began with your own child. At that time, your child was 9 years old, right? And you let him ride the New York City subway alone. And for those listening who live in New York City, such as myself, the subway is quite interesting, right? So many parents shy away from even letting their children go on there. And what prompted you at that time to let your child go on the subway completely alone? And how did everybody around you who heard about it take to that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And the subway is interesting, but I think 6 million people take it a day. So some people don't put their kids on it or don't take their kids on it with them, but most of us do. It's how New Yorkers get around, as you know. And the reaction to my letting him do this, which was something that our son Izzy had been asking, can I take the subway alone? Can I try to find my way home from someplace by myself? He was asking because it was something that we were doing all the time anyway. Just like, your kid might want to, if you're riding your bike around the neighborhood with him all the time and he's 9 and finally he says, can I ride my bike to school by myself? Can I ride my bike to, the store by myself? So it was that question. It wasn't out of the blue and it wasn't like we weren't on the subways all the time. And so we finally decided that made sense. Our son, can speak the language and he can read a map and he knows the route. And so we let him do this, and I wrote the newspaper column about it. And the reactions were really mixed. I mean, obviously it struck a nerve. I ended up on all those shows, but many people thought it was, nutty and dangerous. Many of them from out of town who don't know, that the subway is something that we're taking all the time. Mm-hmm. And then there were a lot of people who were sort of intrigued because they thought about it and they thought like, I used to do so much by myself at 9. Oh my God, at 9, I was having this adventure or that adventure, rural, suburban, urban. And then they suddenly realized like, wow, kids aren't doing that anymore. That was just normal when I was a kid. And so that was the sort of the tension between, I loved doing that. I don't see anybody doing that anymore is sort of what propelled the story to prominence. And the fact that if you're not in New York City, you think of the subways as hell. So.
Yeah. I mean, some days I view it as hell too. I mean,
yeah, it's true. Some days it feels like hell. It's true.
Yeah, but I just remember even as a kid, I think I was 10 years old and my parents finally let me walk alone. And I remember crossing the streets and thinking, oh my goodness, I was living in Brooklyn. I was like, I hope
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay, and I walked a
Mm-hmm.
few blocks, and that was kind of the extent of it at 10 years old. And that's how I became a little more independent. So I can relate a little bit, but I hadn't gone on the subway yet. But speaking to that, your
Mm-hmm.
call to action sounds like also a response to how things have changed. Thing, things had changed then, and now even
Yeah.
exponentially more.
Yeah.
So what do you think is happening with our parents in terms of not letting maybe the children leave the coop, so to say, a little earlier on?
Yeah, I don't know if people are watching or listening, so I won't bore you with my graphs that I have next to me, but I will look at them. There's something very interesting, which is that there was a survey done last year, published this year, of 24,000 American parents. So that's a big survey.
Mhm.
And they asked what age do you let them, leave the front yard, leave the block, leave the neighborhood. And even by age 14, the majority of American parents won't let the kids leave the block. That is a wow. And then
Oh,
I love to refer to this book from the 80s, the 70s and republished in the 80s called um, it was a series of child development books. And the one I'm going to talk about today was called Your 6-Year-Old, Loving and Defiant. And it was just, it tells you what's going on in their brains and how their bodies are developing. And then it gives a page that's a list of things that neurotypical 6-year-olds were expected to do before they entered kindergarten. Can they stand on one foot for 10 seconds with their eyes closed? Can they tell their right hand from their left hand? Are they getting some baby teeth falling out and, grown-up teeth coming in? Can they walk 4 to 8 blocks in any direction to the store, to school, to a friend's house, to the park? And so what we're talking about is 6-year-olds walking 4 to 8 blocks in living memory, this just being normal before they start kindergarten, and 14-year-olds who are about to start high school not being able to walk 1 block. And that is, I mean, that's a massive reversal. That's as if we were all suddenly, as if the average height in America was 3'8" or something. I mean, it's like people would go like, "Wow, that's strange," because I remember when the average height was 5'4", and now suddenly it's 3'8". You would notice it if it was a physical manifestation. You would notice it if suddenly everybody had a third eye in the middle of their forehead. You would notice it if people went out in fur coats in the summer, if something really strange had happened. But this is very strange, and it is considered prudent as opposed to bizarre. And that interests me, right?
yeah. I mean, I'd love to quote you on that. Prudent. It's considered prudent rather than bizarre. And yes, this is really weird. And I had no idea about the statistics that at 14, so many of our teens are not even walking, like alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
that is a wild. I don't
It's
want
so
to.
wild. It went beyond what I thought, and I was happy that somebody else did the study because I didn't have to do it. But
Yeah.
usually I have my little graph here. Okay,
Yeah.
wherever. Anyway, doesn't matter. Go on.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, again, I don't want to say regressed, but it seems like we've kind of went back in time. We've traveled back where we are just so worried about our children being uncomfortable. And I'm curious from your perspective, are we confusing a child feeling uncomfortable with being maybe unsafe?
Mm-hmm. Yes, as a matter of fact, so after I let my son ride the subway and I wrote the book Free Range Kids, about 10 years ago, Jonathan Haidt, it's actually Haidt. Everyone thinks it's
Hi.
Haidt, it's Haidt.
Hi.
Jonathan Haidt and Daniel Schuckman, two of our founders, were speaking with each other, and they were talking about something strange that was happening on campus. John is a professor, and Daniel was for 10 years the chairman of FIRE, which fights for free speech on campus. And they were noticing exactly what you're framing, that kids who felt uncomfortable literally interpreted their feelings as making them that they were unsafe, which explains why they asked for things like trigger warnings on a book that might contain ideas that they thought were terrible or weird or new. It's why they were asking or demanding that speakers not come to campus whose views they vehemently disagreed with, rather than boning up on their facts and going and sitting in the audience and raising their hand the first second. It's like questions, and it's like, yes, you've said this, but I've heard that. Rather than engaging, they demanded security, right? And you need security when somebody is coming at you with an axe. You need security when there are firebombs. You don't
Mhm.
need security from ideas, because that's the idea of college, is that you get there. And even if it's something repugnant to you or wrong, you hone your chops by thinking together. Why is this so wrong? Is it just that I feel it's wrong, or is it factually wrong, or is it morally wrong? Let me figure this out. And so the discomfort was interpreted instead as danger. And my completely unproven theory about that is that they grew up with so many other things that weren't dangerous being presented to them as actual dangers. Oh, honey, I'm going to cut the hot dog into 16ths. Oh, honey, you don't walk to the bus stop. That's too far. It's 2 blocks. Oh, honey, that car seat that was okay last week has suddenly been declared not safe enough, and now we have a 20-point harness. Let me strap you into that before we drive 3 blocks to the CVS. So I think they grew up in sort of a house of mirrors in terms of what they should be exposed to, what was considered too much for them, and what was considered too dangerous. And they didn't get a real chance to calibrate a riskometer that made sense. And so everything was pinging at 11.
Yeah, I mean, from a psychological standpoint, sometimes we confuse our emotions. I mean, I'm a speech pathologist, not a psychologist, but I see kids doing it all the time where discomfort means danger. So, for example, if let's say someone hears something that contradicts a belief, like, for example, if it's something political, which I don't bring up, but someone else brings up, right? And it contradicts their political beliefs, or let's say what they are used to hearing, almost it looks like they're very anxious and they respond in a way where their tone of voice indicates that perhaps they're super fired up. And there is less room, it seems like, for dialogue, even amongst our teens. Yeah, I mean, just working in the schools, I see that if someone says something that is just contrary to the other person's belief, there is this discomfort. And sometimes, again, that's an alert of, oh my gosh, I'm feeling anxious, or, let me be a little bit aggressive right now in the way I present things, because that is absolutely not acceptable, because that is not how we learn things in our home about what's going on in the world. It's interesting because it seems like what you're saying is that parents are stepping in and cutting up those hot dogs, and making sure that everything is taken care of. Sorry.
No. I am, but I just wanted to say that, and I don't blame parents. They've been told if you don't cut your hot dog into 16ths, your kid is going to choke and it's all your fault. If you don't walk your kid to the bus stop, they're going to be killed and it's all your fault. If you don't stand next to them at the bus stop, they're going to be snatched and it's all your fault. So they've been warned right and left of the worst case scenarios in any everyday situation, to the point where the social norms become that we're all standing next to our kids at the bus stop, waiting for the bus to come to make sure that they get on the bus and nothing bad happens.
Thank you for making that distinction, that parents are actually also being taught this. And also, there's a lot of shaming going on that I've observed where, parents will shame other parents, especially in social media.
Yeah. I actually want to hear about that because people mention it, and I'm not, my kids are grown. So what do you see in terms of shaming?
So what I've observed is it could be a conversation, or it could be even in a Facebook group or Instagram, where people are sharing their ideas about what they're doing as a parent. One example, the most common one, is breastfeeding versus not breastfeeding. Right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden it turns into a whole back and forth about, well, as a parent, you should be comforting your child and you should be doing that. And then, another person chimes in, and before you know it, because social media is kind of not warm and friendly all the time, just, that's an understatement. It's a back and forth.
It's like, why do we care so much about other people's parenting? It's very odd.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I see it amongst professionals too, like in terms of, let's say as a speech pathologist myself, like I see on boards on social media particularly where people are getting into arguments and fights. And I guess behind a screen, when you're a keyboard warrior, right, it's easier to call people out than to their face. But people are awfully judgmental of the way someone else is practicing something, even. Like,
I'd love to hear what the big fights are in speech pathology. That's quite interesting.
Well, it's interesting because I just had an ABA specialist, for example, on my podcast, Rose Griffin. And I wanted her on because a lot of SLPs feel
SLP is speech and language pathologist, right? Okay.
Yeah, we have too many names.
Right. No, I thought also I thought it's like that school leadership something. No,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But no, speech pathologists that were called speech teachers in the school. It's a whole yeah. So we have a lot of names and acronyms. But anyway, so Rose Griffin was on here because again, ABA is an example of dealing with a behavior. For those who are listening, applied behavior analysis. And over the years, it's gotten a bad rep because people have interpreted it to be a very strict way of approaching children. You're looking at a behavior, and in the past, the archaic system, I guess, would make the kid basically do something, force them to do something, and then they'd get a reward. And now it's evolved into a more independent system, and it's not just like a token system, like, here you go, you did what I asked you to do. More applying what you've observed and then, channeling it into, okay, so what are we going to do from here? What kind of behavioral implementations are we going to do? But again, a lot of people say, no way. Like I've heard things like, I hate ABA. I would never do ABA. I've had only bad experiences with ABA. ABA is a danger to children. ABA is dismissing children's freedoms. ABA is awful.
Oh, so everybody's back and forthing about
yeah.
that.
And so that's a big one in terms of incorporating ABA into practices, especially when children can't communicate what they're trying to say. It could be a non-speaking child or, someone. And so ABA is incorporated or even with frustration tolerance, it's incorporated because again, communication and behavior go hand in hand, but that's a big one. And then there's also a big one when it comes to feeding, which, in terms of how to approach feeding, there's a myofunctional way of dealing with it, which is looking at like the mouth movements. Is it from a motor standpoint? Is the mouth opened? Are you able to use all the movements in order to swallow appropriately? While others say, well, we're not looking at it as a motor. We're looking at it as just, just an organic medical kind of situation. So yeah, so even with feeding and swallowing, and then people go back and forth, and yeah, and then to your point, there's a lot of shame, just like in parenting, right?
I think of so many difficult problems too,
and that's why sometimes you think like, okay, maybe we should just focus on what's going on with the child or what's going on with the teen, which is exactly what you speak to. Like, let's focus on what they actually need, which can be different, obviously, for each individual, right? But again, while respecting each other. So yeah, it is kind of weird that we're in this kind of like judgment thing. I mean, my perspective, I don't do the research, but is that social media also has allowed things to really go in a direction of let's just judge.
Right. I think there's that. I started Free Range Kids in 2008 or 9, and their, social media was bubbling up, but it wasn't obviously at the boil it's at now. And there had certainly been plenty of judgment already happening. I mean, it was less voluminous because it wasn't, 10,000 comments on something.
Right.
But in terms of parenting, I'm sure that people have always judged each other's parenting. But it felt like if you think that all roads lead to hell unless you're on this very tiny, skinny balance beam of perfection, then you're going to judge more because it's not just like, God, look at how she dresses that kid. Or, oh my God, she's so overbearing. It's not that. It's like, she's ruining him. And that's a different, that allows you more moral umbrage because you care about this child and you see them being not abused, like literally like hit or starved, but like, I would never do that. And if she does that, it used to be he's going to end up in therapy. And now it's worse. It just, he's going to be like, useless.
Right.
So I think the overstatement of the impact of any parenting decision is what allows us to be so judgmental. Because if you really think that like, if she doesn't sign him up for travel soccer, she's ruining his chances at a decent life. That's different from like, she's not signing him up for travel soccer. A, who cares? Or B, he has a lot of talent. I hope he develops it, on the school team.
To your point, it seems like the moral compass, right, is a big part of this, right? And I think people view that their moral compass as being the guide for someone else's moral compass. And they believe that other parents or other professionals are not using the same moral.
Right. They certainly feel more evolved. But what I think I'm trying to get at, and I'm just thinking this through with you, is that your moral compass could be that's a bad decision or she's a bad parent. But if your moral compass goes to and the child is going to die,
Mm.
or and the child is, going to have their life ruined, then it allows you to take much more umbrage because you care whether the child lives or dies and that parent doesn't. She let him walk to school. What if there's a car that, jumps the sidewalk? What if there's a predator? I care about him living till tomorrow and she doesn't. There was this amazing study done. I just did on Instagram about it about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago at the University of California, Irvine. And they devised a little story. A child is sitting in a car and they're left there for half an hour while their mom goes to do something. But then they told 5 different groups of people, all demographically the same, a slightly different reason for why the child was in the car. And they told Group A that the kid was in the car because the mom was returning a book to the book drop and she fainted or something and didn't get revived for half an hour. And they told Group B that the mom had to do something for work. And Group C and D, I never remember. And Group E was the mom was going to meet her lover for that half hour. Okay. And then separately again, they asked each of the groups, how much danger was that kid in by herself half an hour in the car? Not too hot, not too cold. And it wasn't quite this neat, but on a scale of 1 to 10, the people who thought that the mom meant to be with her child but couldn't because she fainted, they said the kid was like in a 5. And then the ones who thought that the mom had to do something for work, okay, the kid's in a 6. Why'd she have to do that work? But maybe she really did. 7 or 8, whatever is exercise. But by the time they were asked about the mom meeting her lover, they said 10.
Yeah.
The kid was in a 10. And what this just proved very, very cleverly, I'd say, is that we think we're judging danger, but we're really judging the mom. The more immoral we think the mom, somehow we see that she put her kid in more danger. And who puts their kid in danger? Only an immoral mom. So it becomes this cycle of like, you let your kid walk to the bus stop. Who would do that? What if the kid dies? You must be a horrible mother. A horrible mother puts her kid in terrible danger. That kid could have been killed. And it becomes this new level of judgment of, not judging you as a maybe slightly lazy or slightly careless or whatever, but as a mom who doesn't care whether her child lives or dies, the most immoral mom on earth.
Right. And so there's so many extremes that are involved.
Yes.
That's right. And that's what you're getting at, right? That's what you're really saying is that it sounds like we go from the child's walking to a bus to the child's going to die.
Yes.
Or you're the worst parent in the world rather than be like, oh, I wouldn't do that because I'm a little bit, nervous about doing that. And so I'm not sure why you are, which, is okay. Those are fair statements, but we've suddenly gone to this extreme. Now the children are brought up with these extremes and there's no room for any black and white, it sounds like, in terms of what is right and what is wrong. And it's just basically you're wrong and that's it. And this concept of, oh my God, this kid's going to die or this, you're going to be, if you showed them that book so early on, reading that's a lot of things I see a lot, how are they such like, for example, if a teenager is reading a romance novel, and in it, there are, things that might be a little bit, not provocative.
Racy. Yeah.
Yeah, racy, a little bit more exciting, and someone sees those books. I've seen that before. One parent will say, like, how could they do that? They're exposing their kid to really, really dangerous material, right?
Wow.
How could they do that?
Have they ever surfed TikTok?
Yeah, exactly. Their kid is going to grow up to be, something, again, the extreme.
Wear a bodice.
Yeah.
That kid's going to grow up and rip a bodice.
Yeah, that's it. And be on a stripper pole, right? I mean, that's it. That's the end of their life. So yeah, that extreme is also prominent just even from the books, the teens are reading to even just, how much independence they're given really in terms of where they're at in life. Like, should they be going to a party? How could they go to a party, at that age? That's also going to ruin them. They're going to be involved in drugs before you know it, right? If they're at a party with friends. So it seems like there's a lack of independence, or there's a confusion between giving independence, right? Versus...
And being heedless. Yes. Well, I mean, from that early example of the 14-year-old's not off the block. I think that what's happened is that all independence has been rewritten as risk. And in a culture that keeps telling us about the risks of everything, that's not surprising. But I mean, I write about the times that moms are, sometimes dads, but usually moms, are investigated for neglect because their kid walked to the store or rode his bike. There was a big piece in the New York Times yesterday, actually about our work, because the shark has been so jumped that, boy, that moms have been, the most famous recent case was the mom whose 10-year-old walked to a store, it was about a mile, while she was taking her other kid to the doctor. And she didn't know that the kid had left the house. He was supposed to be home. He was there with his grandpa. The grandpa didn't know he left either. And some woman saw him. This was in Georgia, and small town Georgia at that. Saw the kid, talked to him. Are you okay? What are you doing out here? Does your mother know you're here? I'm like, I'm fine. I just went to the store. No, my mom doesn't know. So the woman called the cops, and the cops came. And the cops called the mom and said, do you know that your son is at the Dollar Tree? And she's like, oh, no, I didn't. He was supposed to be home. Oh, you didn't know where he was. And then they came and arrested her. And the obviously the animating impulse behind all this was twofold. One was that a woman wouldn't take the kid's answer like, I'm fine, at face value. He's fine, right? She saw him. She talked to him. He wasn't in distress. And then also that a mom is wrong to the point of arrestable if she doesn't know where her 10-year-old is at any given moment. And that's a new way of seeing parenting. It becomes surveillance as opposed to parenting, right? And yet those two have been conflated. And I'd say one of the reasons they've been conflated is that we have phones that follow them all the time anyhow. So you should, somehow you're supposed to know. In fact, one of the things that the Child Protective Services wanted the mom to do after they got involved as well was to install a tracking device on his phone that would allow her to track him. And they wanted her to do it in front of the caseworker to make sure that it actually happened. And so it's an odd parenting moment. Parents have gone from raising children to surveilling children, and that's become the norm. And a couple things happen. One is that you know everything that your kid is doing. Two is you worry more because you see, oh my God, why did she stop there? Is she talking to a stranger who's exposing himself, or is she petting a dog? Is she picking dandelions, or is somebody forcing her into a trunk? Why did she stop there for 5 minutes? I don't know. So you get to the point where you have all this information and you're expected to know everything that's going on and every location of your kid. And in the meantime, if anything does happen that's sad or bad, you get blamed because you should have known. You had every tool available to the KGB. And somehow something bad happened. It's all your fault.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's also putting parents in this kind of overprotective lens, because when they see that you can get arrested just by not knowing where your 10-year-old child is, then suddenly they think, oh no, I may get arrested. And then they're also, responding to this by maybe like putting in a tracking device, or, telling their child that they need to know where they are, or following their child in some cases because of that fear.
Right.
Right. And I feel like,
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons that Let Grow, which is the nonprofit that grew out of Free Range Kids, is worked to try to pass what we call reasonable childhood independence laws, which have been now passed in 13 states, which is quite amazing, that make it very clear that neglect is when you put your kid in obvious and serious danger. Nobody likes real neglect, but it's not any time you take your eyes off your kids. And so there's a reasonable childhood independence law that has been introduced into Congress now. Hasn't been voted on yet, hasn't even been debated yet. But there is a backlash against this assumption that anytime a child is unsupervised, they're automatically in danger. So a good parent supervises and accompanies their child all the time. So the pendulum is swinging. Let Grow is pushing that pendulum. And so, we're on the way. And the article yesterday about parents who had been, arrested or investigated simply for letting their kids play outside or whatever I just looked at it yesterday when it was 2,000 comments. God knows how many today. And they were very, very much in favor of this is crazy. Kids need some independence. Parents need the grace to be allowed to decide when they think their kid is ready to play outside. So the needle is moving, the pendulum is swinging. It takes its time, but it's going in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of was about the reasonable childhood independence
Mm-hmm.
that was inspired by your work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe in this situation, they weren't really honed in on that in terms of arresting someone and
Well, that state then passed a law. The Georgia after that mom was arrested because her 10-year-old, God forbid, walked to town. They turned around and passed. I think they were
yeah,
the 12th state or something, 11th or 12th state to pass our law.
right. And I
Yeah.
wonder if also you've seen in your work because we have so much access to information now, like it's at our fingertips. Whereas in the past, you would hear from somebody who heard from somebody that
Hmm.
let someone walk all this, 2 miles somewhere and made their own doctor's appointment at, 10 years old. Oh my God, how could they do that? Do you think that having access to this information so quickly of all these different people doing all these different things with their children is impacting this sort of kind of going backwards and bizarre behavior?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's two things that we're talking about access to. One is access to everybody else's parenting decision that people jump on and analyze. Actually, there's three things. Another thing is hearing about anything terrible that happens to any kid anywhere. And so you say, oh, well, that wouldn't be me. And you
Mhm.
immediately do the victim blaming. I would never let my kid walk outside at 6:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. I would never let her go to a party or whatever. So there's the victim blaming. And then there's the tsunami of information that we have about our own kids. And Wendy Mogul, who wrote The Blessings of a Skin Knee, so wise, once said this statement that has stuck with me, which was that don't feel terrible that sometimes you might like your kids' friends a little more than you like your own kids. And what she meant by this was
Uh,
that
yeah.
it's not surprising because if you look at anything very closely, you see the flaws. And of course you see the flaws in your own kids.
Mhm.
And you see only, the kid coming over to your house and being polite, and you don't see the
Yeah.
tantrums at home. But the granularity with which we see our kids today, I mean, there's the portals that show us their grades immediately. There's the constant, contact with the school. There is the tracking. There are the devices in the rooms that, and the wombs, you see your kid, before they're born, you see them in their crib and you see them as a dot on a map. And the Gizmo watch, which I think of as truly evil, allows you to listen in on a kid's conversation, even with the kid not knowing it. I mean, it's a bugging device,
Oh my.
right? Right. And then you can hear him say, like, I hate mommy, or I'm mad at my sister, or I pretended to eat my broccoli and I hid it under the chair. Kids are allowed to have a life,
Right.
but not much anymore. They're sort of treated like inmates in a way, in that you're allowed to, know everything. A friend sent me screenshots from her preschool, the comments that the preschool sent home on a daily basis. Cindy ate all of her nuggets and 3 out of 4 of her, apple wedges. And then there's a schedule of when she went to the bathroom. She went to the bathroom at 8:57 and then again at 10:52 and then at 12:02. Guess what? BM, not just P, BM. And
Uh-huh.
so it's this bizarre level of information that used to be, first of all, impossible. And then the next level was you used to get that kind of information if a child was an inpatient somewhere, if they were, in the neonatal intensive care, you would
Right.
want to know. And then I'm so old, I was about to actually put on Twitter and other social media today for stories of what are grandparents most stunned by that their children are doing with the grandchildren, because the idea of recording every diaper change seems onerous. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
It sounds to me like, and I would love to hear your take on this, that there's a level of control, right? That maybe parents need to feel in terms of letting their child kind of go because it's scary to them. And from the research I've seen that sometimes they feel dysregulated themselves because they feel like they can't control what's happening to their child. And then the child then also feels dysregulated and nervous in terms of, all the things that they're trying to do. And then they kind of feel like they need that support. And then to the other point that you were saying in terms of not the learned helplessness, but also there was something else that you said that really resonated with me, just in terms of with the family, right? So within families, I think that we show, at least I know I show my worst side because it's easy because hey, there's some level of
Yeah.
in love. They know me so well, and so it's so easy to see the flaws, like, and then in your own children see their biggest flaws because they're going to show you their darkest moments.
Yes, that's true.
But they're going to show up and know that this isn't their family. They can't act in a certain way. But to your point, there's also judgment within families because I observed a parent indicating that their sister isn't like them in terms of, the way that they nurture their children. This parent essentially does everything for their child, including doing homework with them, which is fine, right? Or doing the homework for them. But the meter was, the sister doesn't do homework with them or lets them kind of do the things on their own. So therefore, who's the better parent? Who gets the Parent of the Year award? Is it the one that is doing all these things for their child and is there all the time and never traveling and never going anywhere because they need to be there for their kids? Do they get the Parent of the Year award, or is it the one that is actually letting their kids be on their own and is actually separating from the child and is traveling for self-care and is enjoying it?
Yeah, I feel like the extreme judgment between, siblings or within families is probably as old as Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
That was like the first family we knew of, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of extreme judging and who's better. But in terms of the control idea, I think that's the big lie, is that if you have all this information and if you have all this information, where your kid is and how they're doing and what are their grades and what's their temperature and who are their friends and what are they watching. And somehow, if you have all that information, you can create the perfect child. And the more information, the more likely you are to, make this kid great. We always say, make good choices. And it's like, you actually want your kids to make some bad choices and learn from them. But there's very little opportunity to do that if you're watching and saying, like, honey, I saw that you just took a right turn. You want to take a left turn there. And, it's all foisted upon parents. I was just listening to a podcast about ed tech, how it sort of infiltrated schools.
Yeah.
And I feel like all this information gathering infiltrated parenting. The portals and the information from the schools and the surveillance opportunities. And we're not equipped to know this much about our kids. Is it good that he is, dawdling on his way home, or bad? Is it good that he got a B, or bad that he got a B? I mean, it's just too much for us to calculate. And then we have to decide the exact right course of action, knowing that he's walking home slowly and he got a B and he only ate 3 out of 4 of his orange segments today. That's like, I couldn't figure out if that's, is that good? Is he, ruminating and developing a growth mindset, or is he anxious and he's going to lash out? I mean, there's the assumption that if you have all the information and ever more, you can use it. You can put it in your algorithm and spit out the perfect parenting response that then creates the perfect child. And that's a big lie.
I mean, it's interesting because I've seen perfectionism in all areas just backfire a lot, because the moment you lose that control, then suddenly, it's really hard just to move forward because suddenly you lost that grip. But, what you're saying is interesting because that control also is allowed through all these platforms. And I remember when I was younger, there was no cell phone. So basically, when I went out with my friends, my parents couldn't contact me. There were payphones around, and I still remember being in front of this mall in Brooklyn where I grew up. And I remember, I had a quarter with me to put into the payphone. I was looking for a payphone because I didn't want my parents to get nervous. I finally found a payphone, put the quarter in. Maybe we had a brief chat, and that was it. But for hours, they couldn't locate me. And so
that's all of human history you're talking about.
And I speak to that because I know as a child, I couldn't be located. And I feel like maybe there was less anxiety and less stress involved for the parent because, again, if you can't locate the child, then it's great. Ignorance is bliss. It's better not to see things, right? You can't follow anyone. And even I see when children get older and they're living with their parents, let's say, and the parents know when they're coming home and they're not home, it's very alarming to the parent, right? Because they want to know exactly when they'll be home. If not, they may be out there, who knows, at a bar somewhere getting drunk, right? If they're a young adult, or the mind goes to the extreme these days, right? Where it's they may be, out with someone who is dealing drugs. It really does go to all those places,
Dark places. Yeah.
very dark places where so many parents have said, once my child moved out of the home, suddenly I'm not worrying as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not just that ignorance is bliss. It's that maybe it is just ignorance is bliss. But I'd say that the reason it's bliss is because ignorance is a sort of mean word for trust, right? Or faith, right? Which is that I basically think things are fine unless I have evidence to the contrary. When you're told that you have to be watching all the time and given the opportunity to do so, the base assumption is that you better be doing it, or thank God you can do that because so much could be going wrong. And so you never really end up developing what I call the trust muscle.
Yeah.
The muscle that says, okay, I can't see him. He's probably fine. I know that this is true of me because I'm terrified of cars. And if I think of my kids driving around, or if I'm with them, oh, why are you driving so fast? Or, did you signal your lane change or whatever? But they're driving when I'm not with them and I don't have to think about it all the time. And so it's the same with crossing the street. Are you looking both ways? They're grown-ups. And I'm like, put down your phone and cross the street, pay attention. And so there's something about knowing too much, seeing too much that we're not equipped to deal with. I mean, it's so new, this ability to know where they are and to be able to contact them at any moment. I always refer to, in Harry Potter, they get the Marauders map and they can suddenly see, the Weasley twins are in the joke shop, right? And it's a miracle. It's magic. It was a cool thing, one of the many cool things that J.K. Rowling invented in those books. And now it's just, oh, the Weasley twins are at the joke shop. I guess that means they'll be home in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's just it's an entirely new ability to know what's going on with your kids. And we are not equipped to deal with it. And it's almost like it's creating OCD. OCD is when you need to check, when you need certainty. Because you can't deal with uncertainty. Did I turn off the stove? Did I lock the door? Without, what's the therapy for those is that you have to, leave the house and sit for 15 minutes without knowing whether the burners are still on.
Yeah.
And there's no chance to do that when you have certainty that you can check anytime you want. And so we're actually creating sort of OCD when it comes to the world and our loved ones by providing so many points of contact, so many points of certainty.
OCD, like you said, is just the need to feel certainty. There's no room for doubt. There's no room for not knowing. And then you're always checking, right? You're always checking.
Yes.
Now there's this constant checking with the children. But as you mentioned, something that resonated with me, which is, if you learn how to drive with someone, with a parent, that
The
could
worst.
be awfully, I don't recommend it to anyone. I tried with my dad and then I had a friend teach me because it was so scary. My dad was like checking, wait, what's going on? What's going on? And like, I was freaking out, so I don't recommend that, just as a side note, because it's really not good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've spoken a lot about this piece of not allowing for independence. But at Let Grow, you're really trying to have adults think about how to give the children opportunities to be independent.
Yeah, let me explain our 2 free programs for schools because that's, I think they work really well. They're being studied now as actual therapy. So one of our programs, our sort of star program, is called the Let Grow Experience. And that is a homework assignment that teachers give students. And we were just talking to a school with special needs, sort of a special needs school yesterday that was very excited to do this. But it's for all kids and it's for K through 12, so all ages. And what it is this assignment to go home and do something new on your own with your parents' permission, but without your parents. And each month there's a different theme. Do something, for your family, do something in your community with a friend. And we give a list of, potential ideas. And of course, they're different for the high school kids than for the younger kids. But the whole idea is for the kids and the parents to talk about it. It's like, well, I really feel like I'm ready to walk to the bus stop, or I think it's time for me to make dinner. That would be exciting for me. And I want to go get the ingredients, whatever it is, anywhere along that continuum, so long as it's a stretch It's not just like, I put the fork next to my plate. That's not very good. But if it's something new, if you haven't scrambled an egg, that's
Yeah.
significant the first couple of times, right? So the parents and the kids decide what it's going to be, and the kid does this thing without the parents. And so it's a fantastic experience for the kid. Oh my God, I rode my bike to the park. I played there for 2 hours. It was so fun. It was so great. Or I made the dinner and I'm so proud. So the kid is very proud, but even prouder is the parent because we live for those moments when our kids do something on their own without us. It's like, you know what my kid did? She drove herself to the mall, or she got herself a job, or I couldn't have believed it, but he actually took out the trash without me asking. Anything that a kid does of their own volition with their own gumption makes us so proud, and that's what we've sort of drained from parenting. That's why parenting is such a drag today. We're with them all the time, and so A, it's taking up all our time. B, it's a little boring for both generations, and C, we never get to see, would he have shared his toy without my saying, share your toy, Jaden, or, don't forget to say thank you. It's really cool when the mom of the other kid calls and says, you know what, your kid was here yesterday and he put his dish in the sink. I was like, my kid? So we need to be separate from our kids for us to see that they're growing, and also for our hearts to fill. And the Let Grow experience makes that happen on a communal level. And John Haidt always says a collective problem, whether it's phones or something else, needs a collective solution. And the collective problem here is that we're not letting our 14-year-olds off the block. And the collective solution is that if everybody does this, then it's not me being a nut. It's not me being lazy. It's not me being the mom you're gossiping about. It's me doing something for my kid. So it reframes letting go and independence as a gift, as homework, because they're going to get bigger and better. It's a gift you can give your kid to say, I trust you, go do this thing. And it gives back. It gives back to the kid. It gives back to you. And it actually, we keep hearing this, and it must be true because we do keep hearing it, is that it actually makes the parent-child relationship better.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly why, but my guess is that the kid feels trusted, and that's a great feeling. You want your parents not just to love you, but to believe in you. And now they see, hey, you do.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible, the work that you're doing, because it sounds like it really is creating that trust, and the parents know about what the child's doing to become independent, and then also the child is proud, and then the parent is proud at the same time. So everyone's just happy and excited about it. So this is really the beginning of a movement to combat what's going on with parenting as a whole in a collective way, as Jonathan Haidt said, right? Because a collective solution. So do you...
Wait, I was going to mention the other Let Grow thing that we recommend for schools, and it's called the Let Grow Play Club. It needs a better name for if you use it in middle or high school. But anyways, it is that you keep the school open for mixed ages, all the kids together, no phones, free play. And there's an adult there, but they're like a lifeguard, right? They're not organizing the games. They're not making the teams. They're not solving the arguments. They're just there in case of emergencies. And then you put out stuff like, there's balls and hula hoops and chalk and an old suitcase and a bunch of cardboard boxes. And what you've done is you've sort of recreated a old-fashioned childhood in a place that A, has enough kids, because if they go home, the number of kids who are going to end up in the park is generally small. And B, in a place that parents trust, right? Because even if your park is dangerous, or even if they just don't, I have another amazing graph that shows that most parents think that if a kid is at the park, they're 50% of people think if two 10-year-olds at the park, they're in danger of being kidnapped, which is wildly off. Yeah, wildly off. But anyways, and then it's great for the kids, because then you come back to school the next day and the third grader has made friends with the fifth grader, and suddenly the school is even more welcoming and more fun, and you see the fifth grader in the hall, and that's cool. And if you didn't have a friend in your class, but you met a kindergartner who was really your soulmate, well, then school is less lonely, and you've like ignited all the great things that happen in free play that happen less in organized sports. Organized sports, somebody's made the teams, somebody's decided if the ball is in or out, somebody's decided when the game begins and ends. But when you are organizing a game, you have to figure out like, well, if you guys have the Thompson twins, then we have to have the oldest kid because those, so you're calculating things and you're compromising and you're explaining and you're being creative. Wait, this is bad. Let's play it blindfolded. So it's all the social emotional skills that Mother Nature expected to develop when kids are together in a mixed age group trying to figure out what to do to have fun, that we now have to give kids on worksheets because we wonder, why don't they have any social emotional skills? It's like, well, take out free play, which is exactly what Mother Nature expected to happen. She didn't expect it to be taken out. She expected it to be
Right.
engaged in every day so kids would learn how to be humans.
Mhm.
And then you have to replace it with something artificial, which is classes in how to be a human. Well, why don't you just let them be human? Give them the Let Grow Play Club.
I love that. I love that because I see in the schools, and even I work in a school right now, but in general, this free play concept, which as a speech pathologist, we espouse that is
Yeah.
development. I mean, that is
Uh-huh.
starts, right? Reciprocal play can't just happen with you hovering over the child and seeing if they're playing correctly, right? You can't social. But what I'm noticing is in the school setting that not only is there less of the free play, but there also is a lack of recess, like a lack of social interaction during recess where recess is taken away or there is recesses in the classroom. And so, you're not.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
When
yeah.
is it in the classroom? Just because it's snowing or what?
Oh, no, just in general, a lot of places, especially in New York City, some places just don't have the space maybe, or they feel like maybe the children are going to have a lot of difficulties with each other. So they keep it in the classroom. So they're more contained and not having these behavioral quote unquote outbursts with each other.
Wow.
So,
That's so sad because how do you learn not to have outbursts? By playing.
right.
Nobody's going to play with you if you're, impossible. And so the kids actually need the opportunity that they're being deprived of to become the socialized creatures that apparently they aren't. Right?
Yeah.
It's sort
Yeah.
of chicken and egg. You have to keep them in the class because they're not socialized. They're not socialized because you keep them in the class.
Exactly, exactly. And then so now we've instituted a lot of these classes, social emotional classes, to teach social emotional. But again, from my perspective at least, and I'd love to hear your take, you can't really teach that in a class. It has to happen organically where you're having opportunities to engage with people as much as possible and do so in a way where, adults are not necessarily watching your every move to make sure that everybody is safe. Of course,
Right. So safety, I mean, that's why we're talking about like a lifeguard.
yeah.
So yes, I agree. I have to go in a few minutes. But yeah, I think that, there is an organic way. Somehow before there were schools even, kids learned to get along and grow up and be cooperative and work in a society. And we've taken away so many of those sort of natural ways that happens, that we've replaced them with artificial ways, and we wring our hands like, why are kids depressed? Why are kids anxious? Well, they have no free play and they have no independence. And these are the things that make you feel great and also teach you lessons. If you're mean on the playground, then kids don't want to play with you.
Right.
If if you go to the grocery and you forget to get your change, that's a lesson you've learned. We've taken so much real life out of kids' lives that we keep having to give them this plastic simulacrum of, independence and free play. And there's a very simple alternative, which is let grow, especially if you do it in schools. You have all these kids starting to do new things in the real world with their parents' permission, but without their parents. And then you have this wonderful opportunity. I'd say it'd be great if it's every day for kids to be arguing, laughing, creating, becoming friends,
Right.
because they have empty, free time to expand, to become the people that we would love them to be, and take those out of kids' lives, and we rue the day. And so Let Grow's materials are free. Our programs are free. Our website is free. I'm talking to you for free. It's like
Yeah.
we want to change the culture by helping make it easy, normal, and legal. Those are our mandates to give kids back independence and free play. And I'd say responsibility. Kids really love responsibility, even if it seems like they're balking. They want to feel like they're part of a team. They want to feel like they're givers as well as takers. And so all these things together can make a healthier childhood without spending any money.
Yeah.
right? Just stepping back and watching the kids step up.
Yeah, responsibility is a huge one because I see it all the time. When a kid is having challenges with monitoring their frustration and then you give them a responsibility, suddenly that kind of turns around and they just love the fact that they're able to give back, to do something, to be productive. That's a big one. But yeah, Lenore, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. You've shared so much important information, so much research that is so important so that we can really support our children and our teens in gaining that independence. Because, like you said, it's so hard right now with parents being taught that they, need to act a certain way and have a certain level of control or else they're not good parents. And so I love the movement that you're doing that hopefully can just like spread around the country and around the world and people feel less scared and feel
That's it.
comfortable. Yeah,
Right. Wait. Closing my window here.
sure.
Yeah, one of our expressions is less fearful, more cheerful. That'd be great.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And then, but to your point, there is more cheer involved on both
Yeah.
sides. Both
Yeah.
parties are engaged in that level of independence. So to close up, for the sake of time, I just because I could talk to you for hours about this. I mean, this is such an important topic and one in which it just you could go on and on with all these stories. But so everyone can find you on. You said your website, but also
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah. It's the website is letgrow.org. And that's where you'll find, the programs. We have such cool things. We have a little card that you can print out that says for your kid to carry that says, I'm not lost or neglected. My
Oh,
parents know I'm out here. And then you have your phone number on there.
love
We
that.
have a cool thing, I'd say for kids, pretty much K through 5, 4 weeks to a Let Grow kid. First week, the kid starts doing stuff for themselves that we've been doing for them that they could do. And then the next week, they start doing stuff outside and then things with friends and then organizing activities. It's just very, very simple and freeing and exciting. And then we have the programs for schools that are all free. And then information on the state laws are there too. And then you can just look around online for anything with letgrow.org is us. And then me, I'm free range kids because it's from the older days
The
on
old-
Twitter. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
On Twitter, but Twitter's not, people still tune into Twitter all the time.
I wish I could quit Twitter. I can't quit Twitter.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
as
one of
simple
those
as
that
that.
like quit Twitter just because Threads started X or whatever, and
Yeah.
and I was having trouble accessing it, so I was just like, whatever, I'm done. But anyway, so thank you so much again for being here. I mean, you provided a wealth of information, and it's so good to see people like you who are so passionate about changing this really big thing in society because, again, these children are going to be adults, and they're going to have to do things that are contributing to society and they
Mhm.
need this independence and they need to be trusted and so much more. But yeah, I mean, thank you for starting this big movement and really,
Oh, my pleasure. Starting a movement. Oh, no problem. Yeah, well, you're welcome. And I was really happy to be able to talk to you. And
Yes.
thank you for working in the New York City school. My kids
Yes.
went to them too. Right.
Thank you. Thank you. But yes, and have a great day.
You too. All right. Bye, Sharon.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.